Number 4. Water clues. When breakfast was over, James actually ran behind me all the way to the culvert. No relishing the scent of bay cedar and silver bell, no indulging in birdsong or lizard watching. We ran full out down Gumbo Limbo Trail past the butterfly field and stopped at the culvert. We splashed into the water and bending down, peered into the 4-foot-high culvert. "He's not here," I said with great disappointment. "He's not here." I couldn't believe it. Putting my hands on the bottom of the flow, I all-four'd it through the culvert, splashing and soaking myself as I went. On the other side I looked around, then all-four'd it back to James. "He's not here." I sat down on the bank and dropped my head in my hands. James patted my shoulder. "I'm going to the canal to see if that living dinosaur moved over there. Want to come?" "I'll stay here," I answered. I was too discouraged to move. "The culvert was good thinking," he said. "You're on the right track." He climbed the bank and disappeared down the road. I stared into the water, not seeing anything, just thinking how empty I felt. I had been so certain I had found our dragon and that he would soon again make our hammock safe for the woods people. Gradually my eyes came into focus. Before me swam a mere handful of tiny mosquito fish called gambusia, but there should have been thousands. These little fish eat nothing but mosquito larvae. James told me that gambusia, together with the dragonflies, once kept the mosquitoes under control in southern Florida. But as swamps were drained for farms, houses, and roads, the little gambusia died off. The mosquito larvae hatched by the billions. Not even the dragonflies could control them. The county had to spray pesticides from airplanes to kill the mosquitoes, and the good insects died with the pests. The dragonflies died with the mosquitoes. Since Gumbo Limbo Hammock is out of the spray zone, our mosquitoes are under control. The dragonflies speed through the trees like squadrons of little bombers, catching and eating their prey. Whenever I can, I walk behind them in their mosquito-less wake. I also picked my fishing spot on Gumbo Limbo Hole because it is protected by mosquito fish. Concern for the little fish got me going again, and I four-legged it back through the culvert to see what might have killed them. When I stood up and looked around, it was very apparent. The water that ran into the culvert came from the direction of the condos and airport, which are sprayed with pesticides twice a week in the summer. The rain washes the pesticides to the drainage ditches and through the culverts, including the one where I stood. The chemicals collect in the still pools and settle on the green algae. The little fish eat the algae and die. And that's not the end. While up in the tree, I had seen that the water from the culvert flowed into the cypress swamp in its slough. That meant the pesticides were being washed into the cypress swamp. The little fish would eat the pesticides, and the sunfish would eat the little fish, and the big fish, turtles, and birds would eat the sunfish. Then Dejun would eat the big fish, turtles, and birds. Our dragon might be, if not dead, dying of a strong dose of toxic chemicals. I was not feeling very happy when James returned. "Dejun is absolutely not in the canal," he said. "That new pestweed, hydrilla, is solid from shore to shore and as far up and down the canal as I can see. Even our reptilian bulldozer friend couldn't plow that weed, Jam." He rubbed the several days of whisker growth on his chin. "I'm worried about that hydrilla getting a start in Gumbo Limbo Hole," he said. "It's a terrible weed." "But it's so far away," I said. "Birds can carry it on their feet and even in their droppings. It's almost impossible to kill because it has a network of roots that produces bulbs or corms by the thousands. If you kill the leafy top with a weed killer, the corms come up the next day, and one stalk can grow 3/4 of an inch a day. Hydrilla suffocates the big fish and stunts the little fish. We'll starve if it gets going in Gumbo Limbo Hole. We've got to find Dejun and save him and the hole." "Now where do we look?" I asked. "He has to be somewhere." James ran his fingers through his hair. "He didn't grow wings and fly away. A 12-foot alligator wouldn't leave our hole in wetlands unless there was a drought and he was starving to death." "Which he is not, thanks to Gumbo Limbo fish and your turtle trap," I said. We sat down to decide what to do next. A snowy egret alighted near us and walked gracefully among the reeds, his white plumes falling like lace down his long neck. He stopped, one foot lifted, his neck cricked. Like swift lightning, he whipped it out and caught a fish. With a twist, he tossed it in the air and swallowed it head first. We laughed in admiration. The egret stalked on. Well, he likes little stunted fish, said James. Hydrilla might do him some good. He leaned back in the grass and looked up at the small white clouds gathering like scattered sheep in the morning sky. Do you think a poacher might have gotten Dejun at night with a flashlight? James asked in such a low voice he seemed to be talking to himself. No, I answered. I know it, he laughed. It would be hard to poach a 12-foot alligator in this hammock. Too many woods people watching, just grabbing at stars. He rolled up to a sitting position. And where is he? We've looked everywhere. Not everywhere, I said. Where else? Under us. I patted the earth. This limestone we're sitting on is full of tunnels and caverns. Maybe he crawled into one of them. Why would he do that? He needs sunshine and fish. Scared. He knows about guns. I saw him hide from a policeman. He did? James broke off a reed and chewed it. You're getting warm, Liza Kay, he said. Any alligator as big and old as Dejun must have been shot at many times during his life. He's hunter-wise, and you're right, he's hiding. But he can't hide forever, I said. He has to eat. And you know what that means. He'll catch something, then thrash and swirl and turn and beat the water with his tail until Travis hears him and shoots him. True, James said. We've got to get him into the solution pit. But first we've got to find him, I said limply. We both thought. I've got an idea, I said. Our class went to the county government center last year. They had maps of the natural resources of the county. The swamps, hardwood and cypress forests, wet prairies, brackish marshes, and even the mangrove swamps. Mangrove swamp, said James, taking the reed from his mouth. Aha! If he's got to a mangrove swamp, he's safe. Nothing but an alligator with his suit of armor can get through those entwined trunks and walking roots. He pulled me to my feet. A map is a good idea, he said. We can trace the sloughs and wetlands and see if he might have gotten to safety in a mangrove swamp on the other side of the highway. How could he cross? The traffic's awful. Through the culverts, James said. You pointed that out. If the map has Gumbo Limbo hammock on it, I said enthusiastically once more, it'll show caves and tunnels where Dejun might hide. I didn't believe for a moment that he had gone to the mangrove swamps. You go to the center and get a map, James said, and I'll wait on Dejun's beach for Travis. I want to take him to another lake. We need more time. Since I was on vacation, I wasn't dressed for visiting the government center and told James I was going home to change. We started off with James leading the way down Gumbo Limbo Trail. Suddenly he stopped and pointed over the trees. About 50 vultures were circling the cypress ridge beyond the pineland. Something real big is dead, he said. Dejun? I asked with concern. Could be, he answered. Let's check it out. We ran, scaring up a beautiful blue butterfly. Like a chip of dusty sky, the fairy creature flitted to the flower of a Spanish needle and sipped nectar. A Miami blue, I said. I thought they were rare, James remarked. Really? I said. I see a lot of them here. James mused. We slowed down for James to look across the butterfly field. There are all kinds of butterflies in this hammock, I went on. Some of them are on the endangered animal list, the butterfly book says. Know your butterflies, do you? Pretty well. I like to collect caterpillars and keep them until they hatch. Ever seen a butterfly emerge? As a matter of fact, I have. That's how I lost my first job. I was 3 hours late because I was watching a drab brown bag turn into a glorious tiger swallowtail. I was fired, he sighed. But I had seen a fantasy as miraculous as a pumpkin turning into a coach. We ran again, crossed through the hammock, taking bearings on the vultures as best we could, and entered the pine forest. The cat's claw and saw palmetto tore at our clothes as we worked our way through that mean land, and then we were in the cypress forest. We sank up to our knees in muck as we rounded the flanges of huge old trees. The air roots of the strangler figs held us to a crawl. I've always wondered how the Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon and his men strode around Florida in all that armor, or even without it. After about an hour, we came to the canal where the vultures were congregating. The kill's a lot bigger than Dejun, James said as we approached. Pushing back willow limbs, we climbed the canal bank and looked down on 50 or 60 naked-headed vultures. At the sight of us, the birds spread their black wings and took off like huge vampires. The air reeked of decay. The birds we saw were feeding not on Dijun, but on thousands of dead fish. James didn't seem to mind the foul smell. He stepped off the levee to the water's edge and walked among examining fish, plants, and weeds. "Everything's dead or dying," he called, and reached into his back pocket and took out a jelly jar. He filled it with water from the canal and smelled it. "Brackish," he said. "Salt water is killing the freshwater life." I slid down the embankment to his side. "How does the salt water get way up here?" I asked. "The bay is miles away." "Some of it can come up the canal as the tides come and go, and some of it might come up through the soil." James held out the jelly jar and studied it. "Fresh water," he said, "is lighter than salt water and floats on it, even in the ground. This is well country. If you pump off the fresh water for drinking and washing, the salt water rises and takes its place. Too many people are pulling off too much fresh water and letting the sea rise." "We're not far from the condos," I said. "Is the salt getting into their wells?" "Must be, and probably La Playa's municipal wells." The vulture stopped circling and dropped down on the dead fish again. "Gumbo Limbo Hammock might be in trouble too," he said. "We might have to move." "Where would we go?" I cried, then considered a moment. "Mom and I'll be all right. She will soon buy a house, but where will Priscilla go? And Caruso? Where will he go?" I went on. "Not to mention you. The otter, the egrets, the negas, the bobcat, skunk, mink, and weasel, and Dijun. What can we do, James?" "We'll report this to the director of the Water Management Department," he said. "I'll take the sample to him. He'll have to do something. In Miami, they pump fresh water into the ground to push down the salt water. La Playa may have to do that too. Expensive, or we might have to dig wells farther inland. Also expensive." James counted the dead fish in a small area and multiplied it by the size of the entire area to get an estimate of the number of fish killed. He made a note on each species. We were about to walk down the canal toward the bay when he stopped. "Liza Kay," he said, "that salt intrusion from the bay can be stopped right here." He picked a twig from a tree and tasted it. "Buttonwood," he said. "For ages and ages, buttonwood trees, which are very adaptable, have formed a barrier between the salt water and the fresh water. These ridges they make are natural dams. This is one of the canals that was built to drain the cypress swamp to build Silver City. The engineers dug the canal through the buttonwood ridge and left it open. Salt water comes in and the fresh water drains out to sea. If the engineers put a dam here, the fresh water will seep back into the ground and push the salt water down below the well bottoms." "Won't it back up and flood Silver City?" I asked. "There are some lands on which nothing would be built on in the first place," he said, "and a swamp is a primary one. Still, you're right, it will flood Silver City and we can't do that. I'll have a talk with the director." We left the vultures to their feast. Their great wings swished like taffeta skirts as the birds rose, then dropped down and challenged each other for the fish. I looked back. Where the salt water was seeping upward into the land, the sawgrass and cypress trees were dead or dying. We walked home in silence. "Get yourself dressed, Liza Kay," James said when we reached the hammock. "We need that map. I'll take Travis to the lake by the new houses." James," I said when we reached the sawgrass prairie, "would the saltwater intrusion make the blue-green algae grow?" "No? Why do you ask?" "I saw a mass of blue-green algae in Gumbo Limbo Hole when I was up in the oak tree." "That's bad news," he said. "That means pollutants." He rubbed his forehead and frowned. "I didn't think Gumbo Limbo Hammock was on the watershed that drains the farms and septic tanks. Seems to me that the polluted runoff doesn't come our way." "I'll have to check it again on the geology map." "We sure need Dijun," I said. "Gumbo Limbo Hole is going to turn to scum. He really was our protecting dragon." We came upon Caruso in his home in the mahogany grove. He was carving a fork from a piece of wood with his knife and talking to a friend called Beef Bones. Caruso often brought friends home for a bowl of Mom's soup. "Where have you two been?" he asked. "Looking for Dijun," I answered. "You ain't found him yet?" He was smiling. "No." "Neither has the official." He winked, and his long bushy brows dipped over his deep-set black eyes. "I met him near the condo golf course this morning as I was going off to work. That man worries me to death. He's poking around here. Can't find me living out here like this, homeless, so to speak. He'll report me to the shelter and I'll have to live with nasty Mr. Burnster again. Crusoe put down his whittling. I just can't tolerate that Burnster. He's always telling me I can't sing worth a coyote. I just can't tolerate him, not a minute. Then help us find Jejune, Crusoe, so we can hide him, I pleaded. Then the official will leave. Why would he do that? The old singer asked. Eventually he'll think Jejune's dead and go away. What'll make him think that? Without Jejune in the hole, in a very few days the blue-green algae and hydrilla will choke Gumbo Limbo whole. Scum will cover it. That will tell the official that there is no alligator and he'll stop hunting him. That takes too long. I'll just tell him I saw a poacher shoot him, Crusoe said, smiling. That'll make him quit hunting fortissimo. He looked at his rumpled friend to see if he was impressing him. Good idea, Beef Bones said without moving his lips. Beef Bones was as thin as his name and also smelly. I backed away, pulled James' sleeve to come along, and started through the woods. After leaving James at the banyan tree, I went home by way of the solution pit to taste the water. It was fresh and sweet. It should have been salty. Things are mysterious in nature. As I passed Priscilla's home, I saw that her card table was folded and hidden behind a tree. Her 2 bags of mini gin bottles were stuffed between the flanges of a cypress, and she was nowhere in sight. I decided that she was afraid Travis would find her and had hidden somewhere. I didn't mean to pry, but as I looked around for her, I happened to see, tucked under the brown paper bags, many little packages of sugar, like the kind you get for free in restaurants. Priscilla must stop in for coffee and collect them too. Nature is mysterious, but so are woods people.